It feels like every single time we get some sort of official information involving Game of Thrones Season 8, there's a whole new set of leaks that hit my DMs over on Twitter. Make sure you go follow me. In this video, I'm going to discuss a few of those said leaks, mainly a list of supposed episode titles for Game of Thrones Season 8. Now, the main reason why I want to focus on those in this video is because I've never really been sent something like that before, and as we get closer to the season premiere, some of these leaks may become more credible. But nevertheless, they are still to be taken with a grain of salt because a lot of them are still 100% horseshit. But just to be safe, here's a spoiler warning. Before we get started, please slap a like on this video, as the like goal is going to be 420. Also, make sure you're subscribed, and then make sure you have your notifications turned on so that way you get alerted every single time I drop a Game of Thrones video throughout this long night. Okay, so the first spoiler, or we can't even really call those spoilers at this point, but the first leak that we're going to jump into is a very curious leak to me anyway, because part of the leak contains information from the prequel. Yeah, that's right, the freaking prequel, which hasn't even really began filming yet. If you remember, they just announced that Naomi Watts would be taking on one of the lead roles for that. So apparently, the other half of this person's leak, which if you guys want me to entertain, even freaking entertain that idea, I'll whip up a video for you. But they mentioned how basically a friend of a friend had some information about a loose script outline that was sent out to some of the actors that are auditioning for parts. They were able to get a hold of a few paragraphs of that, and from those few paragraphs, they drafted up this entire idea of what the first episode of the prequel, which is, as of right now, is being dubbed The Long Night. It's more of a successor show, not so much a prequel to Game of Thrones. But they said they were able to draft up some sort of light synopsis for what the first episode is going to be like. Once again, if you guys want me to cover that in a video, let me know down below and I'll cook it up for you. But the half of the leak, of that leak that was sent to me that I do want to entertain, is the fact that they said starting on December 21st, which just so happens to be the first day of winter, but starting on December 21st, HBO is going to release a series of 6 miniature, like 15 or maybe 10 to 15 second teasers that are going to promote certain characters and highlight what their new outfits are going to be. Now, of course, stepping outside of that, Game of Thrones has done this a lot these previous seasons. Usually they start off with lighthearted teasers like, 5 to 6 seconds at a time. I think for season 6 we had something like the flags waving off in the distance. In particular, I can remember like a House Stark banner. So anyway, that's not completely out of line with them, but the further information they gave is that each one of these teasers is going to highlight not only what kind of armor or what kind of outfits the character is going to be wearing, but also their mindset. Now, apparently during that 10 to 5 seconds, there's going to be a voiceover of each character saying a line that they have in the up and coming season 8. They go on to mention that the only one that they've seen that's been completed is one for Kit Harington, and in it, Kit Harington is wearing all new armor. Not the former fur coat, that we saw in the first official image from EW, but he somehow got on new armor. And it almost looks as though it may be made of, or partially made rather, of bits of Valyrian steel and of dragon glass. But during Jon Snow's little 5-second promo, he mentions how, "I never wanted to be king, and what you just told me doesn't change that." Sorry for my weak-ass Jon Snow impression there, but yeah, to be honest, I usually give these leaks that I do on my channel a pretty hard time. I put them through the ringer. Most of them are nonsense, and therefore I treat them like that. But this kind of sounds legit. Now, we've been given teasers before that are very, very similar to this, so this final season, they need to go all out. We've waited such a long time without really any information aside from a literal part, like it's a millifraction of a second, maybe 2 seconds total, of Jon Snow hugging Sansa, and then this picture of Jon and Daenerys freezing their freaking asses off. So, we deserve to have something, and if it comes in the form of these teasers, if they pack them with little details, and they know us super fans trip over the small shit like, their outfits. I knew when I noticed the red part in Daenerys' coat, I was like, holy shit, she's letting out her fire side. Like, we freak out over shit like that. So they would 100% put something like this in the teaser. If Jon Snow gets a new set of armor, why not show that armor in the teaser? If you remember last season, we found out that Arya gets the cat's paw dagger from these photos that were released several months before the show even came out. As always, you guys let me know what you think about that down below, and also if you want me to cover the rest of those teasers that we're supposed to get. He just told me the first one because that's the only one that's been completed, and he said he plans on sending me more as he views them. And the next leak that I want to talk about, and of course I did the famous air quotations there, but this leak is the actual episode titles that have been released. Now, there is no synopsis at all that went along with these, and this is from an entirely different person altogether. Now, like I said, I wanted to mainly cover it, not necessarily because it seems credible, but because we are getting closer to Game of Thrones Season 8, and I have yet to get something or some piece of information where someone is claiming to have the actual name of all 6 episodes for Game of Thrones Season 8. Now, traditionally, we don't really get to know the episode titles until they come out. I think last season, in Season 7, we got a few of the titles that were released officially. Maybe the first 2 of them were released officially, and the third one had leaked and they turned out being correct. But usually we don't get title information until Season 8 is completely finished film and they have already have the air dates coming out, like we know when the season premiere is going to be, and then from that we can tell when every single episode is going to come out. Okay, so I'll just go ahead and read all 6 of the episode titles, and then we'll go back and discuss what could happen in each episode if this were really the title. So the first episode of Game of Thrones Season 8 is said to be called A Stark in Winterfell. The second episode is going to be called Valor Zaltis. Now, I actually had to look that up because everyone knows Valor Morghulis and Valor Dohaeris, but Valor Daltis apparently means all men must burn. Then the third episode is going to be called Lions and Sheep. The fourth episode is going to be called King's Justice. The fifth episode is going to be called The Long Night. And the 6th episode is supposedly going to be called Dreams of Spring. Now, when I first skimmed through that list, I, of course, went to go and check the full-out Wikipedia page that has every single episode of Game of Thrones ever listed. Now, comparing those titles with these titles, there's definitely a little bit of consistency there. I think, for the most part, King's Justice is a direct reference to last season. In Season 7, we had the Queen's Justice. And then, titles like The Long Night and Dreams of Spring, those seem a little bit too good to be true, but we have had titles called The Winds of Winter. Now, let's talk about the 5th one, because that's the one that kind of stuck out to me the most. I'll talk about the other ones, of course, but the 5th one was supposed to be called The Long Night. Now, traditionally, the second to last episode in the Game of Thrones season is usually the episode with the most intense battles or the most intense climactic events that take place. With this being the final season, that's not going to be any different. We've got almost 10 years of story being told, and we've got all of these different culmination of storylines coming together. So episode 5 is going to be more intense than episode 6 in my opinion, because I feel like episode 6 is most likely going to be the aftermath of either the major battle that just happened or the aftermath. Maybe we get a little bit of a time jump. I don't think we will, and I hope we don't, but maybe we will. So if we look back, the biggest battle so far that's been on Game of Thrones happened again in Season 6. I know I've referenced Season 6 a bunch in this video, probably because I just got done binge watching it, but in Season 6, Battle of the Bastards was called that as an episode. And then most recently in this season, I think it was episode 4, and then of course Beyond the Wall in episode 6, and then episode 4 was called The Spoils of War. But both of those episodes, we got a pretty decent battle, and the episode title correlates to that. So every time we think of The Long Night, speaking of which, that's going to be the name of the prequel. So maybe that is the most legit title leak out of this whole thing, because they want to kind of stick that in our head even further. Like, hey, we're going to have a successor show titled The Long Night. But everything about The Long Night says battle. This, most likely, if turns out to be true, this is probably going to be the episode where we get the fight between the living versus the army of the dead. But just to sort of negate that a bit, I don't know if it's going to take that long to get the culmination of the battle between the living and the dead. It would be awesome if we get, different skirmishes throughout, and then episode 5 is like the final battle. But for the most part, I think we're going to have the living and the dead interact before episode 5. Then jumping back to episode 1 being called A Stark in Winterfell. Now, according to the synopsis that we were given from EW, the very first episode has Jon Snow and Daenerys arriving to Winterfell. And that episode, for the most part, takes place or just sort of revolves around awkward reunions between characters who either hate each other, they've never met before, or it's been a really long time before they've been, or since they've been in the same place. So if this episode is in fact called A Stark in Winterfell, given what we know about the episode that has been confirmed to be true, I think it'd be a play on the title if it is called A Stark in Winterfell, because of course Jon is returning, so there is a Stark coming back to Winterfell, but also Jon's not exactly a Stark. Now, he has Stark blood, but he's Rhaegar's son and arguably the one true heir to the Iron Throne. If you ask me, Daenerys is the one true. Then moving along here, we also have Valor Zaltis. Now, that's the one that I looked up, and it means all men must burn. Now, this could be a callback to last season where Daenerys lost her dragon, and as a punishment for that, all men must burn. We have had 2 episodes. I think it was, oh man, I'm really stretching my memory here. I think it was Game of Thrones Season 2, Episode 10 was called Valor Dohaeris. or Valar Morghulis, and then Game of Thrones Season 3, Episode 1, the episodes played consecutively. So I think it was, Season 2, Episode 10, and then Season 3, Episode 1, where it was Valar Morghulis and Valar Dohaeris. So this could be a callback all the way to that. And this episode, if this title is in fact called Valar Exalted, could be an episode entirely of Daenerys getting revenge. Next up is episode 3, with this being called Lions and Sheep. Now, clearly to me, this is one of two things going down in this episode. We have a bit of vengeance for House Lannister, that coming in the form of maybe a small victory on the battlefield against Daenerys, or it could also mean the opposite, meaning that, lions are usually ones who prey upon the sheep. Maybe those sheep are actually the lions, and this could be the episode where Cersei dies. Now, I thoroughly enjoy Lena Headey as an actor. I, like everyone else, of course, hate Cersei Lannister, but having her die, or at the very least removed from power, has to happen. There's no way they're going to end this series without giving her just desserts, more so than the Walk of Shame. This could also be the episode where maybe Jaime finally makes it to Winterfell, and then also we have the leaks about Tyrion Lannister betraying Daenerys. This could be the episode where that betrayal finally takes place. Then next up, we have episode 4 and episode 6. I kind of already talked about episode 5 when I mentioned the long night, so I'm not gonna, break you guys' eardrums with that one again. But episode 4 is supposedly gonna be called King's Justice. I don't really have too many thoughts on that because I feel like that's a little bit too much of a callback to last season, and they probably just slipped that one in there. That's the least credible. I guess since King's is spelled similar to King's Landing, it could be the Justice of King's Landing. Maybe this is a battle between the Night King, or maybe this is just the episode where the Night King reaches King's Landing, so the battle is finally brought to Cersei's door. And then lastly, we have the Dream of Spring, or Dreams of Spring rather. Now this episode is of course going to be complete closing. The end game for the entire series is going to revolve around it. As far as Dreams of Spring or anything related to what George is going to be calling his last book in the series, I don't know if they're going to do that. Now, like I said earlier, they have, named an episode The Winds of Winter, so it's not too far off to think that we get certain episodes in the last season named after some of his books. I just feel like it's super cliche to call the last episode Dreams of Spring. I don't know. You guys let me know what you think down below in the comment section. Alright, I've talked your ear off enough. I want to thank you all so much for watching. If you could please slap a like on this video, as the like goal is going to be 420. Also, make sure you're subscribed, and then make sure your notifications turned on so that way you get alerted every single time I drop a Game of Thrones video throughout this long night. Super special shout out to every single member of my Patreon family over on patreon.com/Sir Hunt's Reviews. I want to thank you all so much for watching. My name's Mark, and this has been Sir Hunt's Reviews.